Over the next few years, they made me pull the scam again and again. Sometimes they'd change the illness, sometimes they'd take me to a different town. But it was always the same routine. And every time, I'd feel a little more hollow inside, like they were taking pieces of me and replacing them with lies. I tried to tell people what was going on a few times. Once, I even told a teacher at school, hoping she'd believe me. But when she called the Masons to discuss it, they showed up with crocodile tears and a sob story about how I wasn't coping well and made up tall tales. The teacher believed them. They always did. Why would you tell them? Why would you disappoint us after all we've done for you? Do you think anyone's gonna believe a little kid like you? They'll just think that you're just a lying little brat. Now shut up and keep doing what you're told. By the time I was 14, I'd had enough. I was tired of being their puppet, tired of lying to strangers who only wanted to help. But it wasn't until they decided to fake my kidnapping that I knew I had to do something. Hi there, my name is Adam. I don't really remember who my mom and dad were. They left me at an orphanage when I was only a year old, so I don't really know anything about them. At any rate, when I was only 8 years old when the Masons adopted me, I remember standing in the orphanage hallway, staring at the door, hoping that this time, maybe, I'd be going home with people who'd finally treat me like family. When the Masons walked in, they looked friendly enough. Mrs. Mason wore bright red lipstick and smelled like strong perfume, while Mr. Mason had a loud booming laugh that echoed through the hall. They smiled a lot, held my hand, and told me how happy they were to bring me into their family. I was ecstatic. I thought I was finally getting the parents I dreamed of, the kind that would care about me and keep me safe. The first few days at the Masons' house were fine. They'd bought me new clothes, toys, and set up a bedroom that felt like it belonged to me. For the first time, I thought maybe I'd found a real home, but it didn't take long for me to realize that something was off. One evening, they sat me down at the dinner table. Mrs. Mason folded her hands neatly and looked at me with an unsettling smile.
Adam, dear, we need your help with something important.
What is it? You know how sometimes people aren't as lucky as we are, right? I didn't know what he meant, but I nodded anyway. I really wanted to make them happy. After all, they had given me a home, and I felt that I owed them.
Well, we need you to help us tell a little story. You see, there are some kind people out there who will help families that are in need. It makes them happy to help people. It makes them feel like they are making a difference in the world.
Okay. But how can I help?
We are going to play make-believe, and we're going to pretend that you're very sick.
Sick? But I'm not sick. Exactly, but we need you to pretend. It's all just a game. You like games, don't you, Adam? I nodded again, but this time my stomach twisted. Something didn't feel right. I didn't like the way they were looking at me, like I was a pawn on a game board, something they could move around however they wanted. They made up a story and then made me practice the story for hours. I was supposed to look weak, to cough on cue, to act like I was in pain. They told me what to say and how to say it, and when I didn't do it right, Mr. Mason would pinch my arm or twist my ear, muttering about how I needed to do better. The first time we pulled the scam, they brought me to a church where they introduced me to a bunch of people I'd never met. They told them I had some kind of rare illness, something I couldn't even pronounce, and that they couldn't afford the treatment. I was supposed to look sad, so I kept my head down and shuffled my feet like they'd taught me. A lady with kind eyes came up to me, tears welling up as she pressed some money into Mrs. Mason's hand.
You're such a brave boy. I'll pray for you.
I felt sick to my stomach. These people were helping because they thought I was really suffering, but it was all a lie. Still, I didn't say anything. I was scared of what the Masons would do to me if I messed up. And again, I felt that I owed them. They had given me so much, and so far they really hadn't asked much of me. That night, as we sat in the car counting the money they'd made, Mr. Mason slapped me on the back. You did good today, kid. Keep it up and we'll be rolling in it. But, is what we're doing right? Yes, well, we are giving people hope. We are? For sure, yes. You saw how happy that one lady was, right? Over the next few years, they made me pull the scam again and again. Sometimes they'd change the illness. Sometimes they'd take me to a different town. But it was always the same routine. And every time, I'd feel a little more hollow inside, like they were taking pieces of me and replacing them with lies. I tried to tell people what was going on a few times. Once, I even told a teacher at school, hoping she'd believe me. But when she called the Masons to discuss it, they showed up with crocodile tears and a sob story about how I wasn't coping well and made up tall tales. The teacher believed them. They always did. Why would you tell them? Why would you disappoint us after all we've done for you? Do you think anyone's gonna believe a little kid like you? They'll just think that you're just a lying little brat. Now shut up and keep doing what you're told. By the time I was 14, I'd had enough. I was tired of being their puppet, tired of lying to strangers who only wanted to help. But it wasn't until they decided to fake my kidnapping that I knew I had to do something. They thought they'd hit the jackpot with this one.
Think of the sympathy, Adam. They'll believe anything we tell them, and we'll be swimming in money by the time it's over.
I listened in horror as they laid out their plan. They would claim I'd been kidnapped, ask for donations, and maybe even demand a ransom. They wanted to tell people that I'd been missing for days, maybe weeks. All I had to do was hide out in an abandoned cabin they'd found until they got the money. Then, they'd rescue me, and we'd go back to our usual routine. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I couldn't go through with it. I was done. I wasn't going to let them use me to hurt people anymore. I was going to expose them, no matter the cost. I waited until they were asleep, then snuck into Mr. Mason's office and grabbed the stack of papers he'd been using to keep track of the money they'd scammed over the years. I took pictures of everything with my phone, making sure I had proof of every lie, every con, every disgusting scam they'd run. I never really knew why he kept such records. Maybe it was a pride thing, like he enjoyed seeing how much they had earned over the years. At any rate, I copied everything. I knew I couldn't go to the police directly. They'd think I was just a kid making up stories again. So, I waited and acted like I was going along with the plan. As we had discussed, I went and hid at the cabin, but instead of waiting there, I snuck out and went to the police station and told them what was going on. They were surprised and doubted my words, but then I showed them all the copies of my dad's paperwork. It wasn't enough for them to believe me outright, but it was enough that they agreed to give me the benefit of the doubt. Sure enough, my parents showed up to the police station hours later and told a really sad story about me being kidnapped. The police had me hidden in an office, but I was close enough to hear them filing a report and saying that I had been snatched by a man in a white van and that he had already called them and was demanding a massive sum of money for my return. I nearly laughed at their statements. Meanwhile, the police officers that were with me were scowling. They were disgusted that parents would treat their own child as nothing more than a prop so that they could commit fraud. The police let them believe that the plan was working, but secretly, they were just gathering up evidence. The officers went to our home, making it seem like they were just there to gather any possible evidence that might help them to track down the man that allegedly kidnapped me. Instead, though, they were there to get the original copies of the paperwork that I had mentioned. I had told them where they were hidden, and sure enough, the police found all of it. They then went to the cabin that I was supposed to hiding, and they set up a sting there, so if my parents showed up, that they would be arrested. Sure enough, my parents went on social media and begged people to help them by donating to fund that would pay for the ransom. Once the story got out of hand and began to spread like wildfire, I then went online and posted copies of my father's records. All their misdeeds were public knowledge now. I then made a few videos of myself explaining how they had used me in the past to scam people and that this one was just the latest way to steal from people. The public was outraged, and people were calling them all sorts of names and threatening to hurt them. The backlash they were experiencing was delicious to see. People truly hated them. Some people that had been scammed by them in the past began to report how they were duped to the police, who were already combing through my father's records and were building a massive case. Eventually, my parents realized that their plan had failed and that people knew about their misdeeds. And of course, they blamed me, and then rushed to the cabin, eager to make me regret ever having the courage to stand up to them. The second they entered the cabin, they were thrown harshly to the floorboards roughly and handcuffed and brought to the station where they were thrown into cells. The officers that had handcuffed my father was so disgusted at what they did, he beat him up and gave him a pair of black eyes and a split lip. As they sat there, wondering what had happened, I approached them with a grin on my face. Mr. Mason looked up at me. He knew that I had betrayed them. They both knew. You think you're so smart? You think you can just ruin us and get away with it? You ruined yourselves. I just made sure everyone else knows it now.
You ungrateful little brat, after everything we did for you, this is how you repay us?
Everything you did for me? You only adopted me to use me. I was nothing but a prop to you, a way to make money. You never cared about me. They both stared at me, stunned into silence. For the first time, I saw something in their faces that almost looked like fear. I walked out the door and didn't look back. In the days that followed, the Mason's story blew up. My post had gone viral, and everyone knew the truth. I still don't know how they managed it, but during the night, they managed to escape. Years passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. I went to college, made friends, and found people who treated me like family. But I never forgot about the Masons. Part of me always wondered where they'd ended up, and whether they'd gotten what they deserved. Then, one day, I got a call from a detective. They'd caught the Masons in another state, running a similar scam. They were facing multiple charges of fraud, and they wanted me to testify. The trial was surreal. I sat in the witness stand and watched as the people who'd taken everything from me tried to weasel their way out of their crimes. They looked older, worn down, like they'd aged a lifetime since I'd last seen them. When it was my turn to speak, I told the court everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I wanted them to know exactly what the Masons had done, how they'd used me, lied to me, manipulated me. And this time, people believed me. The evidence was too damning, their lies too obvious. As they were led away in handcuffs, Mrs. Mason turned to me, her eyes full of hatred.
You ruined us.
No, you ruined yourselves. I walked out of that courthouse with my head held high, finally free of their shadows. The lawyer that had been assigned to my case told me that the police had gathered up enough evidence to give life in prison without parole. That freed me from them, but I was still only 14. Thankfully, there were people that saw the difficult position I was in, and as luck would have it, a family came forward that wanted to adopt me. I was skeptical at first, but over time they proved that they only ever wanted to keep me safe and make me feel loved. And I'm proud to say that I do indeed feel loved and appreciated. It was a complete 180 degrees from what I experienced. So now my life is much better. I no longer have to participate in any scams or committing fraud, and I finally have a stable family life. In the end, the only thing I regret is not turning the Masons in sooner. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.